Howdy. Thanks for listening to Let the Movie Speak. Before we get started, we'd like to ask a favor of you.
It's a simple favor. If you could just rate and review our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you listen, that might help other ears get into our ecosystem here and hear another episode. Anyway, enjoy the show.
Don't you see what he's been doing? He's been using you to be near me, to smile at me behind your back, to try to rouse something in my heart that's dead. You can't. Heathcliff's not a man, but something dark and horrible to live with.
Do you imagine, Catherine, that I don't know why you're acting so? Because you love him.
Oh, Heathcliff, you must not do this villainous thing. She hasn't harmed you.
You have.
Then punish me.
I'm going to. When I take her in my arms, when I kiss her, when I promise her life and happiness.
Oh, Heathcliff, if there's anything human left in you, don't do this.
Graham's magazine didn't exactly overflow with praise for the novel. How a human being could have attempted such a book as The Present without committing suicide before he had finished a dozen chapters is a mystery. Contrast that with the overt acclaim the New York Times heaped upon William Wilder's film adaptation. Poetically written as the novel not always was, far more compact dramatically than Miss Bronte had made it, it is unquestionably one of the most distinguished pictures of the year. Does Wuthering Heights have to be one or the other? And do adaptations owe any allegiance to their original sources?
Let the movie speak.
Hello, listeners. Welcome back. We're so glad you're with us again for this 8th installment of Let the Movie Speak. How are you, Justin?
Oh, howdy, Travis. I'm doing excelente. And how are you?
I am doing fantastic. I'm not sure that's quite as good as excelente, but it's somewhere on the scale. And we have a returning guest this week who I'm sure is going to have a lot of great stuff to say about the well-lauded classic novel adaptation we have, and it's Annie. Say hello, Annie.
Hello, Annie.
Wonderful. And before we get into discussing Wuthering Heights, we are going to give you a little background into what we watched this week. All right, let's start with our esteemed guest, Annie. What did you watch this week?
Well, I watched a silent film starring Harold Lloyd, known as Safety Last, which is one of the most appropriately named films I've ever seen. Safety was clearly not anywhere on their priorities when making this film. But I actually think the better reason is why I watched this silent movie from, I'm not sure, over 100 years ago. And Travis always accuses me of having a story for everything, and well,
usually they're interesting and good.
Yeah, I really appreciate the usually. I do. Yeah. I'm going to take that as a win.
No one has a perfect batting average.
No, I'm fine. So back in early 1940s, my grandmother was about 20. She's an small town Oklahoma girl, and she comes out to UCLA to go to college, and is paired up with another young woman of her same age named Peggy Lloyd. And Peggy Lloyd is the daughter of the famed Harold Lloyd. Mm-hmm. And so my grandma and Peggy would, spend their weeks at UCLA, and then they'd go on the weekends, go up to Hollywood, stay with Harold, go to the Hollywood parties, have a lot of fun. And there's a lot of family stories that came out of this era. One is that when they would come back from their parties, they would both have to come in and give Harold a kiss on the cheek, which sounds creepy, but it was so that he could smell their breath and make sure they hadn't been drinking.
A little less creepy.
Yes. Yeah. Now, this is World War II, and there's lots of soldiers, especially with the Pendleton Marine Base nearby. And Peggy started going with a Marine captain who was quite the looker, and he would go with them to these parties. But somewhere along the road, this Marine captain kind of swerved his attention from Peggy over to my grandma, and eventually pretty quickly, he got orders to go to Ohio, and said to my grandma, like, "Oh no, what are we going to do? I have to go to Ohio in 10 days. And she goes, "Well, we better get married." And that is how my grandparents got married.
Nice.
Wow. I exist because of the Lloyds, and I'm guessing that they may not have been a great fan of my grandparents, since my grandma married Peggy Lloyd's boyfriend. But anyway, they always loved Harold
There's a
Lloyd.
little bit of Wuthering Heights in that story.
There is a little bit. They always spoke highly of Harold Lloyd and just really loved him.
And so Harold Lloyd, for those of you who might not know, and I didn't know this until Annie told me this is what she was going to talk about today, is he's like Buster Keaton, Charlie Chaplin level sort of auteur silent film physical comedian. And so the movie you watched was called Safety Last. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it has a really famous sequence in it.
It has. He has to climb a building that in the film is supposed to be 12 stories tall, and the shots are pretty amazing. And the most famous scene is when he's climbing up and there's a clock on the side of the building, and so he grabs onto the hands of the clock to try to get up, but of course they swing back down and he swings out over thin air, and then the whole face of the clock comes down. So if you've ever seen Harold Lloyd, that's probably what you've seen.
Yeah.
And I mean, he is a brilliant physical comedian. While I was watching it, all I could think of was he is just visually witty.
Yeah.
Like, it's just smart filmmaking and hilarious. And the music it's an orchestra, but
Right.
it almost sounds like sound effects at times. And so absolutely brilliant. Now, there's no plot. There's no characterization.
It's just sequences.
It's just sequences. And so I would highly recommend Harold Lloyd, but I would recommend him as YouTube clips, not as like commit to a whole film.
Filmography or film or anything
So
like that.
I would say like go look him up on YouTube. You're gonna like it at least for 5 minutes.
Plus, it's my grandpa.
Plus he could have been my great grandpa.
Or great grandpa, yeah.
If my grandfather had married Peggy instead of my grandma. So anyway, I really enjoyed it. There are some stereotypes that are not great.
Yeah, we've been working our way through some of those,
Yeah.
haven't we, Justin?
Oh, yeah.
I wish, if I could have my way, I would just, the film would lose a minute while I clipped a couple little bits, but
We've had that conversation many a time, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
go look up Harold Lloyd.
awesome.
It's a good time.
All right. I love Buster Keaton. I've always admired Charlie Chaplin, but I need to watch the whole thing of that movie, I think. Justin, how about you, my friend? What did you watch this week?
So I watched a movie called Lucky Grandma, and if you're like me, you're gonna say, "What's that?" This was a movie that my wife actually recommended. I said, "Hey, do you want to watch something?" And she said, "Yeah, let's watch Lucky Grandma." And I thought, what? So apparently that wasn't a euphemism, and that wasn't code for anything else. That was a real movie. This came out in 2019.
What?
If you can remember all the way back then.
No.
And it stars Sai Chin. You may remember her from Joy Luck Club. She was in that. She played the mother. Also in James Bond world, she had a minor role in, which one is it? I think it's You Only Live Twice. That's the one where they're in Japan, right?
Oh,
you remember,
geez.
Travis?
So an old Bond movie.
Or Annie.
Yeah.
Well, Joy Luck
Yeah,
Club, the movie's
Connery one.
pretty old too.
Okay, so
Okay,
is she the lead
so
in this movie you watched?
She is the lead.
Okay.
And so this is, she plays the titular Lucky Grandma, and this is in New York City's Chinatown, and it's this recently widowed grandma who goes to the casino and somehow comes across a large sum of money, and that lands grandma in the middle of a gang war with different parts of the Chinese triad or Chinese gangs of some sort. So it sounded like a kind of a bonkers concept, but it sounded so bonkers that I thought, okay, it might be all right. And I'm really happy to report that it actually is way more than all right. It's actually a very good movie, not at all what I expected. This movie, from the first beat, man, when the first note of the orchestra, which is like big band, comes up on the screen, it's like, okay, this movie is popping with some personality, and largely it succeeds. Apparently, the director in this movie, I'm gonna forget her name now. It's Sassy something.
Sassy Sealy.
Yeah. So I think this is her first feature length film, and way to go for Miss Sealy. It is almost a home run. It's a fairly unique story, and So there is some violence in this movie, but the way in which the violence is conducted it kind of reminded me a little bit of Coen Brothers violence, when it tends towards the more ludicrous. It's so not glorified, and there's a scene where these guys try to attack Grandma while she's getting her hair permed, and so her bodyguard, who's this other Chinese mafia guy, he uses a hot curling iron on them, which sounds really brutal, and I think like in the hands of a Tarantino it would be a really gross, horrific scene. But it really is just played. It's played straight, but with kind of a deft hand, so that it also looks silly in the right way. Silly, like, let's step back and realize people are fighting each other with a curling iron. I'm just like, even if you just read the police report, it's like, this is kind of crazy. And so, to the movie's credit, a lot of the movie is kind of handled in that way, with one eye almost kind of winking at you, and that doesn't unfortunately carry through the whole time. Most of this entire movie is actually from the point of view of Grandma, which is to this movie's credit, and in the kind of climax that falters a little bit to the movie's detriment. But despite that, I think I would definitely recommend this movie, and I'm happy to give it a plug. Grandma.
It sounds wild. Like, if somebody pitched that movie to me, I'd be like, I would never watch that. And literally, a recommendation like what you just gave is the only thing that might get me over the hump to watch it.
Justin, when you first brought this up, I there was some eye rolling, I'm going to confess. Yes. But now I want to go watch it. So you have convinced me, at least.
Okay.
Travis may still be on the fence, but
I mean, I would definitely consider it now. Before, I'd be like, a movie about a grandma who's fighting gangsters. Like, nope. But that sounds like, I mean, if it's good and it's that, I have to see how it's possible. So thanks for the really out there but interesting sounding plug. For my money this week, I watched The Stand, which is a new series on, I think it's only on CBS All Access, which I'm not sure anybody has except me, because I got it so I could watch The Stand. But, The Stand is a Stephen King story, big, fat, I think it's like 1,100 page novel. Considered one of his better, if not maybe his best novel. It's huge in scope, and it takes place in a nation gripped by a pandemic. It's kind of a super flu that kills 99% of the world's population, and then the 1% that are left, it's sort of a post-apocalyptic story about good and evil. And so this is a new adaptation. It's like modern day. There was like a miniseries back in the 90s. This is really, so far, with the first episode, I will say, above and beyond what I've seen on network TV for this type of thing. When it comes to adaptations, you usually either see, and this is a good way to get into Wuthering Heights, you usually see like a slavish, almost beat for beat, lines of dialogue copy pasted, and then they end up on screen. And sometimes that's fine, and sometimes it's kind of uninspired and bland. Or you see, we took this idea, right, and we turned it into something completely different, or we sort of missed the swing because they didn't quite get what the source material was saying. This is seemingly doing a very good job of adapting the spirit of the story, not losing any of that, but kind of repackaging narrative structure and aesthetic and really good just performances and execution all around. So I'm excited to continue watching The Stand, but I would say from episode 1, I would not turn anyone away from it if Stephen King or that kind of thing is your thing. And it's not like straight horror by any means. This is more of a drama, like a big epic drama. So that's what I started watching this week, and maybe I'll continue with the Stand next week. But I think talking about adaptations is the perfect way to get us to our featured film this week, which is 1939's Wuthering Heights. So I'm going to start this section because I'm sure I'm going to be a bit of the odd man out today, and that's fine. I think I'm the only one here who hasn't read Wuthering Heights. I know Annie's read it, and I believe, Justin, did you just read it for the first time?
Yeah, I've only read the book once, and that was a couple years ago, so fairly recently.
Oh, I see. So, great. So you've read it once. I've read it once, and Annie's read it a couple times.
I read it twice, and there was a 20-year gap, which made a difference.
Oh, interesting. As far as the film goes, definitely my first time. Justin, how about you?
Yeah, had never seen it either. Frankly, it hadn't been when I closed the back flap of the novel. I didn't run out to go to Blockbuster. I guess that's not around anymore. But I didn't hop onto my computer or whatever and look at hey, what are the movie adaptations of this? I would love to see this on the screen. So no, and I guess that's a little maybe preview of some thoughts I have. But yeah, no, it's the first time I'd heard of the movie, and so therefore the first time I'd seen it.
And just so you know, there's one Blockbuster left, and it's in Oregon, and they're still open, and I want to go there. But I don't know if they have a copy of Wuthering Heights, but I think all of our first, I think, Annie, is it your first time watching the movie? Yeah, so first time with the movie, there's a little bit of varying experience on the book. And so background for this film that's, relevant is it's a big awards movie, which means it was nominated for kind of all the major Oscars. So picture, actor, actress, director, screenplay, and then in addition to that, art direction and original score. And the only one it won out of the 8 was cinematography, which was a black and white category. Best cinematography, black and white, and then they had a color category, which I'm sure that did not last a lot of years, a few years when they were doing a bit of both. In addition to that, it is the American debut of Laurence Olivier, which is obviously significant because he would become a blockbuster force for some popcorn flicks as well as a bunch of Shakespeare and just kind of everything. He's kind of an everyman if you need a Brit, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think he does lean towards more serious roles. Yeah.
I think of him in, isn't he in Othello? And
he's definitely
Yes, well, because he did the classic blackface for Othello, which
that's cool.
Gets lots of discussion.
Yeah. So other than that, I mean, David Niven would go on to be, a certainly important British actor for a long, long time. This is a young David Niven. And sort of a slew of perfectly fine actors, if not very good actors. And I think the big story with this one is the adapting process. So with the most experience reading the novel and now equal experience having all seen the film one time, what would you say works and maybe doesn't work about the adaptation before we get into the nuts and bolts of the movie itself?
Well, it's difficult to figure out where to start with that question. I think I do know where to start. It only covers the first 40% of the book, and so I think that you have to start there. That it's not telling the whole story; it's telling the first 40%. So for good or for ill, there's a place to start. Okay,
so it does some surgery to the novel, big time. Cuts out an entire generation of characters, right? Which kind of affects the movie in the sense that they condense character moments and dialogue into characters that already existed in the film instead of bringing in basically some more kids, to move the story forward. And let's get into it. I think that's all we need to know. It's a important, famous, classic novel, big time Oscar buzz movie, and made plenty of money for the studio. Let's see what we think about it. Okay, because the tease was so good, we'll let Annie start this section. Quality of the film, story, acting, technical stuff. Where do you want to start with what you think of the movie?
I think I'll start with the acting because I like to start positive.
Okay.
I think the acting overall is excellent to serviceable. There's one child actor who I think must have been somebody's granddaughter because why else would she get that role? But for the most part, I think they were doing the best they could with what they had.
Yeah.
And so you've already mentioned Olivier and Niven. Merle Oberon is a major name too, as the female lead. And so
Kathy, yes.
Yeah. I think the acting is worth watching.
Yeah.
Just simply as acting. I think you and Justin probably have more to say on issues of cinematography than I do.
Okay. That was all very nice and tidy. Now tell us what's not good about this movie.
I hate this movie so much.
Okay. There it is. Yeah. Okay. Hate the movie. Hate the story. A little bit of both. Yeah.
So I told you I read the book twice.
Right.
I read the book just a few months ago, and then I read it 20 years plus earlier. And I think when I read this as I don't know how old I was, 17, 18, 19-year-old. I thought it was darkly romantic and but I read it as someone with a few more trips around the sun.
A few more rings on the tree.
A few more rings on the tree. And I just hate these people.
Yeah.
And to me, it's not about love. It's about rage and greed and all sorts of other bad things.
Yeah.
And I don't see any love in this story anymore. And whether we're talking about the novel or the movie.
Sure.
And so they're not people I want to spend time with. And for me as and the way I watch movies, that is really how I enter into.
That's where the thumb goes up or it goes down.
Are these people I want to spend time with? And no, they're not.
Justin, are these people you want to spend time with?
No, not unless I was forced to at gunpoint or musket point or something. No, it's I think I share very similar sentiments to Annie. While it is a really well acted movie, I mean that seems like kind of a given with Laurence Olivier in the lead. It's painful to watch, and that's not just because I agree with Annie too about the source material. It's a really difficult book to get through, and I think it's kind of supposed to be. I mean, I don't know what Annie's opinion is. In my opinion, the novel is a tragedy, and this movie adaptation tries to turn it into a romance story.
Absolutely.
And I think that is kind of the big issue, right? And so I know that the point of our podcast is let the movie speak, but I don't know how we can totally divorce the source material from a discussion about this movie. Because while it won so many Academy Awards, it seems to kind of reinforce that idea that the Academy just likes to nominate and award movies that make Hollywood feel good about itself and that represent what Hollywood wants movies to be. And this seems like a great early example of Hollywood taking, whether or not you like the story of Wuthering Heights, and I'm in no rush to go read it again. I'm not sure that many people, and feel free to disagree with me, Annie, if you do. I don't know that many people would objectively say it's poorly written. It's not a good, as a structure, as a piece of art, this is not well written and well done. Mm-hmm. It's tremendously powerful, but it's powerful like a wild horse loose in your house or something. It's not something you want to sit back and really revel in. So yeah, to me this is it's not an enjoyable movie because it takes the powerful thing about the story and it really tries to sanitize it. So Laurence Olivier as Heathcliff, here is, I can see why people would, if they just saw the movie, and that's the trouble with adaptations, right? Is that a lot of the times if you've seen the movie, especially with kind of literary to film adaptations, if you see the movie, you kind of tend to think, oh, that's probably some kind of good representation of what that book is about. And I would argue that quite the opposite is true. But Travis, frankly, I'd be really interested to hear your take on it because you've probably got the most objective viewpoint between the three of us. So how did this movie strike you?
Yeah, not amazing. I mean, it's. I think this might be the first movie that I literally wrote down, I'm honestly bored. Because first of all, to be perfectly honest, not my wheelhouse for genre or type of story. I'm not gonna be let me find the most sweetly romantic or soapy plot, so that's one little barrier, but if it's good enough, I'll appreciate it. But yeah, I think the main thing is just I can break down the characters in this movie. I'm just gonna keep saying movie because I don't want to speak about the novel, which I haven't read, but the characters in this story from the film are either repellent because they're terrible or they are just so pitiable. You know what I mean? And there's almost nobody who has I have sympathy for them, and then they have enough agency to like change the course of the story for themselves. And that's a really sucky place to be. Like, you know, I don't know how anybody, if the novel is as you guys describe and the movie is what it is, I don't know how anybody goes through the story and gets to the end and thinks that either Heathcliff or Kathy is, you know, admirable in any way,
At peace.
yeah, or at peace, or like there's any real resolve there. Of course it's a tragedy, but it's also not a tragedy that starts with a whole, again, speaking from the film, it doesn't start on that compelling of a ground. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not like you're watching a beautiful marriage fall to ruins because of, you know, adultery or lying or something, and then it ends like, look how terrible this good thing turned out. Like, they were like crushes as kids, and then they grew up and just kind of were in the same place and stuck with each other. So they, I mean, this is what I get from the film, right? Like, Heathcliff doesn't even know any other woman like in his life. Like, this is woman to him. So of course he's going to be infatuated with her, and she, you know, warms to him. And then you see the switching back and forth makes you feel like, was it real in the first place? And so it, you know what I mean? Like, it's not like this beautiful gem that then gets smashed at the end and you're like, oh, it's more just like, that was like, like being in labor the whole time. What do you have to say about just Heathcliff and Kathy and the center of the story?
Yeah, so I make my living talking about books. So stop me, because this is a movie podcast, not a book podcast.
Last time I checked, yes.
Yes. But the book is saying some really interesting things about romanticism, like, you know, big R, romanticism, you know, 1800s. And it's saying some really interesting things about the ideas that were prevalent then.
Right.
Ideas about society versus nature, nature versus nurture. It was an era when people were valuing things that were rough and raw and of the earth, and that was what was valuable. And things that were of society were considered fake and thin and weak. And so then you have these two men in Kathy's life, and you have one who is of the earth and one who is of society, and you have this pull. Well, that's an interesting sociological discussion in 1840, whenever this book was written. But in, you know, 100 years later, when the movie's being made, that's not really a topic anybody cares about. And so I think the novel is saying some really interesting things on a sociological level. Also, you have the outsider coming in, and as Heathcliff comes into these aristocratic families, and his influence gets purged before the happy ever after. Spoilers. But the by cutting out the second generation, the film completely walks away from that.
Right.
And I think why we're struggling, maybe we're not struggling, but struggling a little to talk about this movie is that your podcast is called Let the Movie Speak.
Right.
This movie isn't saying anything.
Yeah, and we've come to that place with a couple movies. I don't think, I don't know, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Justin, but I don't know to this degree of like, you think classic novel, you see Laurence Olivier, it has gravitas like as a film, but at the end it's just like, they all suck. Like, you know, like, and honestly, I'm not trying to be trite. Like, there's not a whole lot else there other than like, your rage will not bring you to peace, you know. And other than that, like,
you know, I think it's similar, Travis, to a point you made about Frankenstein in an earlier episode, where you did compare kind of the ending, the powerful ending of the novel, of that story.
Yeah, I remember that now.
And kind of contrasted it with the, you know, the ending of the movie, which is just like, you know, kind of a ding dong, the wicked witch is dead. You know, it's like, okay, not much to really talk about there. So this movie, unlike Frankenstein, isn't really resplendent with like, oh, remember that sequence when they're on the moor and they hug each other really tight? Like, you know, there's none of that really here.
Yeah.
But there is, I would contend that this movie is saying something. I don't think it's not true,
okay,
in my opinion, and it's not worth saying, but it's like, oh, isn't that nice? Look, they made it happily ever after at the end, as their ghosts are kind of walking on the moor.
Oof.
And I just thought, wow, what the heck is going on? Heck with a capital H. No, capitalize all the letters, because it just doesn't make any sense to me. You have I mean, they're both very selfish. We're talking about the movie now, and we could say the same about the book, I suppose.
Yeah.
But for the movie, at least, both the leads are extremely selfish, and essentially kill each other,
right?
And then or themselves, as just a kind of a very infantile reaction to not getting what they want.
Yeah.
And yet the movie applauds them and says, that's okay. That's okay. They really loved each other. And isn't that nice? They can find each other in the afterlife. And it's like, what? No, that's not a good, I'm not going to be teaching my children that lesson.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but that's what I think the movie is actually trying to say.
Yeah, my kids have seen this 7 times. It is our moral compass. We go by this. This is how we define love in our household. No.
Oh wow.
Let me take this in a track that I don't think either of you are going to find yourselves in easily, which is technically right. Again, this movie was nominated for 8 Oscars. It only won 1 for black and white cinematography. And I'm going to say some nice things now. The opening sequence of this film is the stranger coming in from the storm and finding an old Heathcliff before Ellen recounts everything and narrates the rest of the bulk of the story to him. Basically, he hears supposedly he hears Kathy out in the storm, right? But that whole sequence of him getting into the house, the way they shoot around that house, and I have to say, like, the fact that the Oscars had 2 categories for cinematography, right? They had black and white and they had color, because this was like the short period in time where both things were being made. Both types of movies were in Oscar contention, and they had to separate them somehow. Just like for some reason right now, there's a separate Oscar for sound mixing and sound editing. I don't understand the difference, but there must be one, right? And in this case, I think lighting especially is used like to its full effect in Wuthering Heights proper. There's a lot of other stuff that's just like fancy person living room, very like everything's just sort of brightly lit, and obviously the costumes are great, and that's all fine and good. But for its Oscar kind of bang for your buck, I really think you really need like the first sequence, a couple scattered sequences throughout the movie, and then sort of the ending bit. I think the aging is done really well in this movie. It makes me remember that like a good makeup job and some good lighting is so much more effective than the CGI nonsense we've seen, trying to be pulled off nowadays. Justin, we're looking at you, The Irishman and Star Wars, and I'm sure, I guess Marvel movies do it now too, but so I think technically, like, this movie, especially in the first sequence, it moves. Like, there's dolly shots, everything has a fluidity to it. And there's a lot of mirrored dialogue in the first, like, I don't know if this is a novel carryover too, but, call off your dogs is like the stranger says it, and then Heathcliff says it when he's younger in the flashback. The dad says, don't make me be ashamed of you, to her when she's young, and then she says it to Heathcliff when she brings Linton home for the first time. And then the glass breaking is really interesting too, I think, where the stranger from the storm breaks the glass, and then Heathcliff does that later. This is pre Kathy's death or anything, but there's a lot of like repeated imagery in the movie that feels kind of ambitious, but it kind of rings hollow in the end. I think the main issue with this will and always, it is going to be the unlikability of the people who are supposedly most important in the story. What about secondary characters?
Yeah, as far as secondary characters go, we mentioned David Niven, and he's David Niven, so I don't have a problem with anything he does.
Yeah.
I think Donald Crisp as Dr. Kenneth is really fun to watch, especially in that scene at the end where he's like, I can't be your doctor anymore. You people are all screwed up.
That's really good,
here.
Actually, yeah.
I think, actually, so I didn't even know this guy's name. I had to look it up. But so the guy that plays Joseph, Leo Carroll, to me, he was the most, even though he's not quite novel, realistic 100%, to me, he felt the most like a character from the book. That is a bit how I imagined in my mind's eye Joseph looked, and a bit how I imagined he acted and spoke. So kudos to Leo for really, pulling it off for the whole 5 minutes he's in that movie.
Okay, I'm forgetting this character. Who's Joseph?
He's the old man servant.
Oh, yeah, so he's in it a lot, but just in little bits and pieces.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. He was like the male...
Right.
He's played more for comedy in the film, whereas in the movie he's kind of a nasty, horrible person.
Oh, okay.
Because it's Wuthering Heights, and everyone has to be. I enjoyed him in the film.
Yeah. I thought all the secondary characters were more likable than the leads.
And I really give credit to Miss Fitzgerald, Geraldine Fitzgerald, who played Isabella Linton. She does, for the part of the movie where before she is actually wedded to Heathcliff, She is just kind of the, I don't know. There's not a nice word for it. She's just playing kind of a pretty face with maybe not a whole lot of going on upstairs. I'm remembering a conversation we may have had about a hairstylist, and so she to her credit, I mean, this lady can act because she does a hard turn. After she's married. And it's really interesting to watch how she kind of devolves and her character turns very very somber and withdrawn and desperate. I mean, to as far as not just secondary characters but other kind of production notes, Travis. I would agree with you. I think the beginning of the movie. And unfortunately, this is I think it's kind of a problem with movies that maybe aren't very good or they're okay. That you can often have a movie that has an amazing opening sequence, like The Watchmen.
Yes.
Okay. Fantastic opening sequence, and you think you're in for the thrill of your life or something, and then it's just like even by the end of the movie, like what? How did the movie start out that way? So on a little bit less of a grand scale, I think this movie is kind of a product of that. And whether or not they shoot the movie chronologically or if the editor just gets worn out, I don't know. But you can really, it's like the production crew is almost kind of exhibiting the fatigue that I think the mainstream audience feels. But I mean, that said, this movie was not just an Oscar favorite when it came out. It was a critic favorite when it came out, right? Like we alluded to. People just thought this was the cat's pajamas, and I'm pretty sure that's the word they used.
Right.
And it's just interesting to see how that, because even though I think we talked about this before in a previous episode, but this movie has also been selected for preservation.
Yeah, I think everything we've watched so far has, if I'm not mistaken.
Is that right?
Yeah. I think so.
So it's interesting to me how maybe that, and that's probably a totally different podcast, but just the kind of it's almost like these things aren't evaluated. It's like myths, right? I think things just get repeated in society, and whether or not they're true, suddenly they become true,
right?
With air quotes, So, is this a good movie? I think you'd be hard-pressed to have a straight face and really make a convincing argument for why this is just a wonderful movie that deserves preservation. And my goodness, what an achievement for Hollywood in the golden age. To me, this is just a byproduct of big studios and taking really money-making... Wuthering Heights is a known commodity. It's been around for almost 100 years when this film was made. And just trying to kind of cash grab on the worst things maybe that this industry has to offer. And if I could just offer one, final note about that. So the ending of this movie that we've talked about, I actually read that William Wilder wanted to end this movie on a shot of Heathcliff when he runs out to go find Kathy in the storm. The last shot of this movie was going to be his dead corpse in the snow. And Samuel Goldwyn, the man himself, said, no, we're not doing that. He said, we are, that's too sad, and you're going to make something a little happier.
That's a producer note. That's a producer note right there, man.
And William Wilder said, no, I'm not. And Samuel Goldwyn said, that's fine, I'll hire a second director, and he'll do that. So that ending shot of them, their ghosts walking on the moor, is just not even a part of the director's vision. So, I don't know that would have made the movie a heck of a lot better, but I think it would have done something, at least for me.
So I think that would have made it better from my perspective. I want to comment on something you said about being worthy of preservation, because as I've made very clear, I don't like this movie, but I do think it's worthy of preservation. And here's my argument. My argument is that if you're going to study the history of film, having Laurence Olivier's breakout role in America is something worth saving simply from a historical record. And also, I think kind of Travis's point about, some excellent use of black and white cinematography. I have no problem with this movie making the list of movies to be preserved. Kind of in the same way for literature, we keep literature that had impact, even if we don't like it anymore. So I think as a movie that had impact, I think it's worth preserving. But I don't think that's the same thing as saying it's good.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I think we said something similar about Frankenstein, right? Like, it's an important movie more than it is a good movie. Like, that's how I feel about this in a lot of ways. A couple other highlights that I want to just point out as we get to the what's it saying section, which will be really interesting on this one since it's saying basically nothing. I liked, as you did, Justin, Geraldine Fitzgerald's performance in two ways. I actually really like her in the first part of her character arc because that is like a real person who's smitten with someone. And to me, you know, I buy her falling in love with him, and it doesn't feel like until she has that confrontation with Kathy that it is like motivated by spite. It feels like she is falling for him. And then when it comes back later, and there's a great moment on the couch where she's like, "Come sit next to me. I'll let you hold my hand under my fan." And it's like, "Ooh, so scandalous," right? And some other woman takes the seat, or he gives way to another woman who's coming over to take a seat. And she has this great look where she just like looks at the woman and just like gives her dagger eyes. So she has like human pathos for just a second, just like a millisecond. And then I agree, her turn as the, you know, Mrs. Heathcliff is I think my favorite moment of acting in the whole movie. Even better than I think Laurence Olivier's deathbed moment, because I don't like him and I don't like her. And there's a lot of like, she needs to just die now. You know, it's just such a prolonged, like painful, again, it feels like I'm in labor or something. And being somebody who's been in labor before, I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to just highlight her too. I think there's one good line in the movie that I'm kind of hoping is from the book. And if it's not, we'll give some props to the screenwriter here. You know, the brother, Hindley, the drunk, right? Who's, again, acted very well, but he's not likable. He's despicable, and he's a jerk from the get-go, and then he just sort of gets beat up on by Heathcliff when he gets money. He says, "Your curse will come to feed on your own heart. Every agony you've given will return." Like, that should be, like, again, if he dies in the snow at the end and we see a corpse, and that's the line that you remember the most, this is probably, like, a lot better of a story, right? If that's what it dares to do at the end. But because of that saccharine, weird, you know, sort of like walking off into the distant ghost things. And also, I don't know if they tweak her narration, but the Ellen, who plays the narrator essentially for the stranger in the snow, she says like, "No, they haven't died. They've just begun to live."
You may have to do some Googling. I think that's from the book.
It may be, but in the book, it might. Again, I'm not defending a book I haven't read, but in the movie, it comes off as like that doesn't even make sense. Like it doesn't make sense, and it doesn't ring true, and it doesn't land at all, right? But I do like Ellen, the actress's performance. I think she does a lot with a little, as does David Niven. You know, again, watching people get beat up like a punching bag as characters is not like fun. But he, especially in that moment where Kathy says, "This marriage must not happen," right? And she's like hanging on him. You see the turn in his face go, "I understand exactly why," you know? Who's your favorite secondary character, Annie?
Well, actually, I wanted to bring up someone who hasn't been mentioned.
Okay.
I really liked the boy who played young Heathcliff. I thought the girl who played young Catherine was just horrific. But I thought the boy who played young Heathcliff was just, I liked him.
He was going for it, I felt like. Yeah.
Well, and I looked him up, and he's a little rascal.
Yeah, okay.
He's not one of the main little rascals, but
Yes.
he had a lot of film experience. You know.
Okay, is it the same? No, it's two child actors. The one who gets hit with the rock or the like more adolescent one?
Oh, the adolescent.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of too. Rex Downing.
Yes. Yeah, he had been a little rascal, and I really, when we were watching him on screen, I still had hope for the film.
Yeah, I agree.
He was sympathetic, right? And he seemed like a kid who had some rough turns and was being treated badly, but still had a heart and a soul. And anyway, I liked him.
Yeah, and I think he's learning, right, like in the movie, he's learning love from one place. The dad, who then dies very quickly, and then Kathy, who's kind to him, and then, you know, they begin to feel feelings, which is what people of that age do. And so there is hope there until she betrays her definition of love, essentially, right? And then he doesn't have any other example anywhere else. So like, I don't know what someone like that does other than rage, but you'd hope something else. Justin, did you like the kid actors in this movie? That's always an interesting question because sometimes kid actors can be a snooze fest.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you guys. Heathcliff is good, and the Kathy child is not. However, I was a little distracted by the. It's obviously a story that takes place not in America, and then you have, and I get it. It's hard, especially in the era in which this was made. Probably be like, all right, children, it's time for you to have a British accent now. But it is a little distracting when Rex Downing as young Heathcliff is like, well, what do you mean? There's no castle here, Kathy. It's like, okay, like as if he was directed like, no, okay, cut. Okay, now you pronounced castle wrong. Okay, you said it like an American. The rest is fine. That's all fine.
Yeah.
You sound like a Yank, and it's not a big deal. But we need to say castle. And so I found that a little strange. It's not the biggest problem of the movie by any stretch of the imagination, but it did not help to take me further down into the story.
Fair enough.
Okay, before we get to what's it saying, which again, I'm on pins and needles to see if anyone has a real answer. Do we have anything kind of nuts and bolts or anything good or any gripes or praises left in this section before we move on from either of you?
I have a funny trivia detail.
Okay.
So these actors, the three main leads, if I'm going to call it Niven, Merle Oberon, and Laurence Olivier, they all hated each other, which I find delightful.
Kind of works.
Yeah. So Merle Oberon and David Niven had been an item. They had been a couple, and then they had broken up about a year before the movie. And so now they're playing a married couple who hate each other as exes, which is delicious.
Method acting. Yes.
And so you could just see it in David Niven's face where I'm like, there's moments when he looks at where supposedly Edgar looks at Catherine with hatred. And I'm like, oh, that's not Edgar looking at Catherine. That is David looking at Merle. And then Laurence Olivier was very upset because he wanted his, at the time, fiance Vivian Leigh to have the role of Catherine, and she didn't get it at the last minute. And so he was just ticked off the whole movie because he was separated from his fiance and didn't want to be. And then he's a stage actor with not a lot of film experience at this point, so he spits constantly.
Of course.
And then so Merle Oberon kept running off stage, yelling about Laurence Olivier spitting on her.
Nice.
And so that actually made me like the movie a little bit more. Was thinking about how much they hate each other. And at some point, I'm assuming it's when Catherine dies, but I'm not sure when. The director told David Niven to cry, and David Niven says, no, it's in my contract. I don't cry.
Oh my gosh.
And the director was like, what are you talking about? And Niven got out his contract and literally had it in his contract that he would never cry on camera.
That's fantastic.
And I love that so much.
I heard something about, the stupid Fast and Furious movies. This is direct segue, everybody. The Fast and Furious movies, they always have like Vin Diesel in them, right? Vin Diesel apparently has some monster contract, like 6 movies, $1 billion, or something stupid like that. There is a clause in his contract that says, if I get into a fight in the movie, I cannot lose. Have you ever heard a more pathetic, sad thing?
David Niven won't cry.
Yeah.
Vin Diesel won't lose.
Exactly. They're exactly the same.
I've always thought so.
Okay.
Didn't they kind of violate that contract? I don't know if that's just for Fast and the Furious, but he plays the tree Groot in Guardians of the Galaxy. And doesn't that thing blow up?
I think it's just.
I think
it's just with the Fast and Furious movies. I don't think it's like me as an actor. I never lose. I think it's like in a Fast and Furious movie, I have to win. Like I have to have a tank top and I have to win. Those are the 2 rules.
That's great.
Yeah.
My final note on this movie would be that on the plus side, I did actually find, which I was kind of surprised by, and it sounds like I may be alone in this. The deathbed scene of Kathy is kind of affecting. Now, I wasn't necessarily weeping, not because it wasn't in my contract, but just because it didn't move me that way. But I did think, Laurence Olivier really he kind of is giving it his all.
Oh sure, yeah.
And just as a feat of acting in that scene, it's not bad.
No doubt, no doubt.
But that's about all I have to say positively.
Yeah. Oh, and I have 2 really quick things. I like the score. I think the score's good. It's one of the first lush we're not doing silent films anymore, so it's not like what you talked about in your What Did We Watch This Week. It's not like we're trying to be percussive and sound effects. It's just a really beautiful score with, a big, huge sound, something you're going to get used to for the next, and still is a thing, right? Like what we know as a film score. And she's the prettiest dying woman I've ever seen in my life. That was the other thing. It's just like she looks literally like she did in the last scene. There's no like bags under her eyes or anything. She's just like, oh, I'm dying now. I'm like, okay. I mean,
Yeah, I'd like to see what her contract looked like.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
that might have something to do with it.
Okay, this brings us to the ultimate goal of this podcast, which I think will be interesting today, but perhaps a little different. The question is, what's it saying? And let's go around the table one last time and give our final concise review. And if we want to attempt to answer what's it saying, it's the goal here. Annie, you go first.
I think when we came into this, we were thinking that we were going to talk more about what it meant to adapt, what it meant to take a story and retell it. And we haven't, I don't think, hit that very, very hard in this conversation. When I think of what it means to retell a story, whether you're going, changing medium like this is or not, I think there is one good reason to retell a story and two bad reasons. The good reason is you have something to say. The bad reasons are make money or something about pride.
Yeah.
Like, when you have the big name actor who wants to play Hamlet because he thinks that that's a thing every good actor should do, so therefore he makes Hamlet. Well, that's not a good reason. And so my question is, did this film have something to say? And I think, as we've already said, it's just trying to be a romance. It's trying to make you feel feelings. And, as I read in the introduction, it's claiming to be better than Bronte.
Right.
And no.
Yeah, I'm with you. For my money, again, not being a novel reader at this point, I've read novels, not this one. The movie, let's be very generous and gracious. It's trying to show us a picture of true love amidst a set of circumstances that are difficult. Okay, that's the nicest way I can put that. But at its worst, it's so misses how selfish and filled with spite and rage the leads are, that it ends up giving someone who might just be waiting for that to be served on a platter to them this very warped and frankly upsetting definition of what love is, right? It's not giving up anything of you for the other person, whether it's your aspirations for the future or your image or anything. It's like, I want you to be exactly what I remember you as. Otherwise, I'd rather you die, So I think the one thing that it is saying, I don't think it's really trying to say, but what sticks for me is not a good thing, And yeah, overall, right, like you said about the novel, these are not people I want to spend time with. The same goes for the movie. None of these people are people I want to spend time with, other than maybe Isabella. Right? Isabella? Wait. Yeah, okay.
I don't mind David Niven's character.
Yeah, and he's fine too, but again, like, people to be pitied without a whole lot of what does he do at the end, right? When he walks in and he sees his dead wife in the arms of Heathcliff, he just goes like, what happened? He's not like, what are you doing here? And that's I'm not talking about like being overly masculine. This is like just a normal thing, I would think. He's weak, and he didn't need to be that weak. And so not a fan. We're supposed to answer also how often will we rewatch this. That's a good one this week. I will never watch this again unless someone pays me a large sum of money. I may read the book if I think on your recommendation, both of you, when it comes to the Brontes, I'll probably start with Jane Eyre, and then if that rocks my world, someday I might circle around to this for bucket list reasons. But based on the movie, it's not going to be the top of my list. What about you? How often would you rewatch this, Annie? I forgot to ask you that.
Never.
Okay, good. Just making sure we're on the same page. Justin, bring it home, man.
Okay, here we go, folks. It's yeah, to go kind of answer the same kind of question that Annie was answering. I don't know if you guys have watched the Netflix series The Crown, any of those seasons. I did try to watch the first two and decided after the second one, okay, that's enough of that. And I read a interesting, not review, more like a infantada against the series by a royal family biographer, because I think they're now on the third season that recently came out. And his contention was, you cannot have a series about real people and present this as if this is history and make up inflammatory and derogatory things about them. That is morally outrageous. And I thought that was a very interesting argument, and I am kind of reminded of that argument when I watch this movie. No, these are not real people, and Miss Bronte wrote a story that she made up, but like Annie said, she made it up because she had something to say. And whether or not we, like it or our degrees of appreciation for that, I think it is, in my opinion, at least a very powerful novel. And to take that and say, okay, well, yeah, we like this novel, however, we'd like to change the very core of what it is and put in something that the novel simply does not say, and do that so we can make some money. To me, that is not the same as libel or slander against the royal family a la The Crown, but it is still a little bit outrageous and just doesn't feel right to me. And I think that is doubly the case when the movie is not very good. It would be one thing if this was like, wow, I mean, this was nothing like the novel, but I mean, I had a great time. This is a real delight. It's just not. And it retains some of the really unpleasant aspects of reading the novel and then takes out the actual meaning of it and replaces it with this very studio system. Hey, people just want a love story. They want to relax and watch a couple hours in the cinema and go home and not really have to think about it. And this movie delivers, because I will try very hard never to think about it again, and I will not watch it again unless you force me to.
Okay. Yeah, and I think what you mentioned about the studio note and that last shot, that's like very emblematic of the movie. The fact that they felt the need to like reshoot that or go second unit to add this saccharine ending to what is a really despicable story. That's how the movie feels. So I'm so glad we all got to suffer together. Some of us more than others because we read it and then we watched it. And I am happy to say that was my first, Bronte experience, and hopefully my future ones will be more enjoyable. But we want to thank Annie so much for coming back. Thank you. Hopefully we didn't torture you.
No.
Okay.
You all are a joy, regardless of the subject matter.
Oh, great. So please join us.
Oh, gosh.
Please join us next week. We have Jimmy Stewart classic, another Frank Capra called Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Spoiler alert, I love this movie, but I'm excited to talk about it. Are you, Justin?
Oh, yeah. And I think we have another guest coming back, so
Yes.
I'm excited for that, too.
We are. So we'll see you next week, and bye.
Let the movie speak.
All you have to do is to shoot.
They'll thank me for it. The whole world will say I did right in ridding it of a rotten gypsy beggar.
Yes, they'll say that. Shoot and you'll be master here again. The whole country will resound with your courage, Hindley. Go on! Shoot, you puling chicken of a man with not enough blood in your veins to keep your hands steady.
Hey, since you're still here and still listening, thank you, by the way, we'd like to ask an additional favor of you.
We have social media. It's a thing on the internet, and all you need to do is find us on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook and like and subscribe. I know this is annoying, but we have to ask you because we want more people to hear the show. In addition to that, if you could rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen, we would greatly appreciate it. See you next week. Bye.